Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Scurry. I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Compliance Officer at Western Digital. Very honored to be here today as the judge for this session. Looking forward to it very much. And let's see, we're going to start with the 10-minute presentation portion. And for this portion, to set the stage, I think you all know this, but we can just review. You've all been called back by the company that you gave your full presentation to for a second visit, so congratulations. They've asked you to speak only about the ethical aspects of the problem this time and to explain why your solution successfully handles any ethical issues. You will have 10 minutes and there will be no Q&A, and you may not use slides or video. And you probably don't want to have more than 2 or 3 members of your team do this part. So we've got plenty of time. As soon as you are ready, then you can just go ahead and begin. And when you do, I will start the timer.
Good morning, Tiffany, and thank you for inviting us back. We're Avant Garde Consulting. My name is Rachel, and I will be presenting today with my colleague, Sophie. In our previous presentation, we spoke in detail about the human rights violations within your supply chain and the lack of transparency to stakeholders. We also provided some recommendations with a 3-pronged approach of evaluate, enact, and elevate. More specifically, these recommendations entail evaluating your suppliers, enacting labor rights programs, and evaluating transparency for your stakeholders. We will go into specific actions surrounding the 3 E's in detail later. Today, we will also discuss in depth the ethical issues surrounding your supply chain, as well as how our solutions surrounding the 3 E's are an effective way to tackle these complex issues.
Your company has come under fire over the past several years for a litany of human rights violations. For example, in 2016, 2018, and 2020, your suppliers, garment workers in Turkey, India, and China faced union discrimination, gender discrimination, forced labor, and poor working conditions, such as overheating within the production factories, restriction in freedom of movement, and unjustified dismissals from employment. These workers are also being paid below living wage.
The textile and garment manufacturing industry is one of the highest sectors of employment for these countries. For example, in India, the textile industry employs about 8% of the population, which is the equivalent to over 110 million people. Across all of 156 of your suppliers, the number of people employed is exponential to that. Given the amount of people that these circumstances affect and the pertinent ties between you and these workers, the magnitude of the situation is not only relevant to your business, but it's also overwhelming. The workers in these countries should be treated the same, no matter their distance, title, or race. These transgressions are a direct violation of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 8 that promotes decent work and economic growth for all. As a company who comes from a country where ethical standards for labor relations are high, you should make it a top priority that any country or company you conduct business with has those same ethical standards.
As of 2021, 17% of your cotton is sourced from China and 24% from Turkey, where human rights infractions have been taking place. While these are third-party suppliers and you do not directly own any of these factories and manufacturing plants, Hugo Boss relies on them and their workers to produce your inventory that makes the company millions of dollars in profit. Without these suppliers and partnerships you have established, your business will suffer. Part of the problem is the way the industry is structured and the reliance on cheap labor to meet shrinking margins. However, Hugo Boss has the upper hand when negotiating with these suppliers. You can give the workers a voice so that changes can be made. You have started tackling these issues, but what has been done so far can be seen as window dressing and not changes to be made to solve the problem. For example, you have issued codes of conduct and given statements against forced labor and slavery, while also ramping up the auditing system for suppliers. However, these actions are perceived as superficial efforts to protect the brand image. You've called us in to help you be the industry leader for change and not just a follower of the crowd. Issuing the statements for these matters is a great start. However, internal and external stakeholders are looking for tangible actions. 70% of consumers are becoming more critical and watchful over their favorite brand's actions within their corporate structure and the supply chain.
It is imperative that the statements you're issuing are aligned with your core actions, or else you may be seen as hypocritical. There is research that shows consumers value authenticity and empathy within organizations. Since the pandemic, consumers have become more aware of what's going on in the brand's end-to-end value chain.
We have developed a three-pronged approach that's ethically sustainable. Again, we surround these recommendations around the 3 E's: evaluating your suppliers, enacting labor rights programs, and elevating transparency. For our first solution, evaluate, we advised for a new C-suite position for a chief supply chain officer. We believe that this will be influential by handling labor and sustainability issues in a more holistic manner. Currently, the responsibilities regarding sourcing, labor relations, and production falls under the CFO and COO titles, as well as sustainability programs also fall under these titles. However, the range of responsibilities that these positions already have does not leave room for complex decision-making regarding sustainability and ethical issues. Someone specifically dedicated to handling these complicated issues can result in real change within the business. Our second solution under this evaluate recommendation is to establish rigid supplier standards that are upholding the most stringent regulations that exist across all supplier countries, rather than tailoring standards based on country regulation. For example, if one of the countries where your supplier does business has rigorous laws regarding ethical standards within manufacturing sites and factories, you can adopt these laws as universal across all your suppliers. By doing this, suppliers are ahead of the curve and norms are already in place ahead of emerging regulations. A legal contract also binds suppliers to these ethical standards. Our first solution under our enact recommendation is to increase supplier pay 10% by increasing the price point for retail garments 1%. Increasing the price paid to suppliers will not only help them invest in technology, but also the workers and increase the wage for them. The additional funds will be required to go towards investments in the technologies or processes within the factory, or towards increasing wages for the employees. This will also be embedded into the contracts. We also propose a prepay system for suppliers, when instead of paying for production orders after the fact, we believe it will empower workers more, as well as combat shrinking margins if 50% of the order is paid for when it is placed, and then the other 50% is paid once the work order is complete. We have come up with this solution because workers feel more empowered by pay raises as opposed to brands simply acknowledging their struggle. All brands need to know exactly what it would cost them to buy a product at a price that leads to a living wage for workers and decent working conditions. We believe that a 10% increase of price paid to suppliers and a 1% price increase in the consumer price point will ensure that your company has the funds to cover these incurred costs, as well as offer a price that truly mirrors what the garment actually costs. Our next solution under our enact recommendation is to invest in making realistic production timelines for suppliers. Last-minute orders and tight deadlines are one of the big reasons why workers are forced into overtime and pressured to work faster with longer hours and less time for sleep. A toilet bowl. However, with the factory, last two solutions tackle our elevate recommendation, specifically elevating transparency for your stakeholders. 1, we recommend impact-weighted accounting being incorporated into your financial statements in order for labor impacts to be quantified and provide a tangible measure for business decision-making. Impact-weighted accounting statements can be released with your regular financial statements and will accurately quantify your labor rights programs and offset your labor costs by quantifying your initiatives. This can be released along with your regular corporate sustainability reports as well. There are a number of firms to partner with to accomplish demonstrating these metrics, including the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board and the Global Reporting Initiative. As more investment managers incorporate ESG issues into their equity portfolio and consumers are relying on transparency, impact-weighted accounting can provide a quantifying framework that directly shows the labor initiatives that you are taking. Our last recommendation under Elevate includes partnering with Retrace, a blockchain technology startup that's easy to access for customers through a QR code. Information is collected on materials, environmental impacts, and labor conditions within the supply chain and tracks the value chain of every garment that you sell.
There is growing pressures from consumers for the fashion industry to tackle sustainability efforts within the supply chain. Many brands, including yourself, have made statements on the matter, but haven't developed realistic solutions. There are 40 million garment workers in the world. Many of these workers don't have the same rights as ourselves. They face discrimination, pay below the living wage, and unfortunately much more. The industry is getting worse each day. It's important that you implement our solutions so that you can start making change. We understand that improving social sustainability is a complex issue. With our ethically sustainable solutions, elevate supplier relationships, enact labor rights programs, and elevate transparency, your company will combat these violations in your value chain and set the standards for the industry. As a member of the board, you need to think if you're comfortable with this. You have significant bargaining power when talking with these suppliers. It is your responsibility to ensure that these workers are being treated with dignity and respect.
Thank you.
Okay. Very well done. So take a deep breath and relax because now you're done. First, I want to say great job to the team. I know that participating in this event is a lot of work and you have to do a lot of research, a lot of preparation. And everything that you came to the table with today was, I could tell it was honed, it was polished, it was very well done. So I know that there's a lot of work leading up to getting to this point. So thanks for doing all of that. I took some notes during the presentations and happy to use this time to give you some feedback in case that would be helpful. And also, if any of you has any questions for me, happy to address those as well. So your team's presentation, it was really outstanding for a number of reasons. This 10-minute scenario is a little bit more challenging in a sense than like yesterday's, where you have the slides and the visual aids that you can use. Without any of that, you've got 10 minutes of just talking to somebody on a topic that can at times be pretty complex. And so it's not easy really to boil that down and think of a message that you can deliver only verbally and have your listener keep up with you and understand where you're going. And one of the excellent things that you guys did was this 3 E's approach. And I was not in the room yesterday when you presented, so this was all new to me, which can make it, even that much harder. But you started at the very beginning with the 3 E's and you said them: evaluate, enact, elevate. And so I wrote those down. And then I heard them multiple times throughout the presentation. And that was critical because that really gives me a roadmap to what your solution is, how you've analyzed it and broken it down. And I know where to fit everything into your bigger picture. If you don't provide that kind of roadmap, then it's just too much of a flood of information and I can't place any of it very easily. And this is really a sophisticated skill that we don't always see a lot. And so I was just so impressed that you did that. So that's definitely something to take away from this and continue using that technique when you're giving presentations like this. It's really helpful. One of the other things, and you guys did really well on this, but one of the nice things about this competition and how it places you in these scenarios where you're supposed to be role playing is that you can really think, well, what would it be like to walk into the boardroom of Hugo Boss or one of these companies? And a lot of times the instinct is, well, I'm doing a presentation, so I'm gonna tell it like it is and say why all these things are wrong and something needs to be done about it. But in real life, you probably wouldn't go into a boardroom and tell it like it is, like exactly, right? Because you don't want to go in there and start lecturing them about how evil they are. That's not going to make them like you very much or be receptive to what your proposals are. So you definitely want to look at it from their perspective. And I could tell that you did that. You gave some nods to some of the things that Hugo Boss is doing. They've put a code out, they've got policies out, they've made statements. One, little nuanced thing that you might consider is incorporating, it's going to sound silly, but incorporate use of the word alleged, right? Hugo Boss has done these things, but they're just window dressing. You probably wouldn't really tell the board member that all the work that the company has done is just window dressing, but you might say it could be critiqued by others as window dressing, or they might say it's, allegedly window dressing. And same thing with the issues that are happening in the supply chain. And, this is delicate. This is a hard thing really to talk about, actually. And I have to have these comments. You could probably see on my background, the ethics, and that's my role at Western Digital. And we're in the technology industry. In your research, you probably uncovered a lot about Xinjiang and the cotton. And, we're grappling with the same issue on chips and things like that, right, in the technology industry. And so you're right, companies don't have direct control over their suppliers and their supply chain. They have position and influence, but what can you really do, right? And so to come in and say, well, your supply chain, all these harms are happening and people are being abused. It's a sensitive thing to talk about. And so just consider it from the company's perspective of how they might want to hear about that. I mean, certainly nobody wants any of that stuff in their supply chain, but you don't want to make the board members feel like it's their fault. I mean, what you want to do is persuade them that there's an opportunity here to do something good, to set a standard. And I liked what you said about Hugo Boss has issued statements, which is a good start, but that it's important to align statements with values so that they can't be criticized as being hypocritical. So I think pitching things in that way is a really good and, quite frankly, a sophisticated technique that I was very pleased to see you come to the table with. That you talked about it in terms of opportunity for the company, which is really, companies do have these moral and ethical obligations, but there are also fiduciary duties. You do have to return value to your investors and your shareholders. And so anytime that you can tie your initiatives or what you're trying to convince a company to do to those responsibilities, that's also very compelling way to get your point across and to get your initiative taken seriously. And again, going back to the 3 E's, I think you had like 2 concrete proposals under each one. And a lot of those proposals, I did hear those business opportunities there, the things that as a business person made me think, this is compelling. This is why it'll be good for Hugo Boss. You talked about like quantifying the labor impacts so that we can include it in or next to our disclosures. And you said the reason to do that is because investors care. And so that's compelling to me, right? I want the investors to like my company. I want the consumers to like my company. So any kind of research like that you can point out that investors make decisions based on this, or consumers make decisions where to shop, whose products to buy based on this. Those are great business justifications to hook into. Any questions for me from any of the team? How has the experience been in the competition?
It's been a lot. I mean, I feel like a really good opportunity to kind of see like what makes sort of a client project, what that might look like. And, you know, especially like I know Paul is a senior in undergrad, and Rachel and I are grad students, and, you know, we're going to move on in our careers. So it's really important to kind of see what these client projects might look like, what kind of research goes into it, what kind of things we might think about. And it's just really good practice. So it's really been an experience.
Yeah, I can tell that you put a lot of work into it.
Yeah, to add on to that, it's been a fantastic learning experience to be able to apply those business school concepts into real life companies, and then provide tangible consulting that can help a company moving forward, especially for issues like CSR that are so pertinent in Hugo Boss's strategy nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, these are important issues, and like I said, they're tough ones to have discussions about, because you've got a lot of conflicting priorities and motivations, and you have to cater to a lot of different things at the same time. Okay, well, nicely done.